Hello and welcome to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Assertitude. I'm your host, Linnea Jungnelius. I could not be more excited about the guest I'm bringing you today, Peter Browning. Peter is a living legend in the world of governance and leadership. He's served on over 14 public company boards, including 16 years at Lowe's, past roles as lead director at Nucor Steel and Acuity Brands, and currently lead director at ScanSource. He's steered companies through CEO transitions, bankruptcies, M&A, and cultural transformations. And he's one of the most decorated directors in the field. Co-author of The Director's Manual, the book on modern board excellence, and a recipient of the National Association of Corporate Directors Lifetime Achievement Award. At that ceremony, his peers described him as passionate, principled, and generous. And after spending time with him, I can tell you that's absolutely true. What makes Peter's story so inspiring is that his wisdom was earned far beyond the boardroom. Peter is also an adventurer, a historian, and a man who's lived the full contact sport of life with humility, curiosity, and a deeply held belief in growth through challenge. Peter, welcome to the show. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Linnea. Thank you for the very kind introduction, and so have I.
Peter, let's start with the person behind the professional. When we last connected, you said something that really stuck with me, which was everybody has stuff. Life is a contact sport. The question is, how will you deal with it? What life experiences helped shape that philosophy for you?
In addition to the sort of everyday things that everybody deals with, because that's just life, I did a very unusual set of circumstances. So I got married in 1963. I got out of college. It was 9 years later, I had a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And we were moving from Detroit, where I'd been in a sales office there, to Chicago. And everything just fell apart for my wife, the mother of the girls, and significant mental health problems. And I think I told you, I'm driving to work one day and the tears are coming down because I thought my life it's ground to a halt. I remember having to go in and talk to the people, the leaders at the company, that I'm ready for more responsibility. Put me in, coach. I'm definitely ready. And then I had to go in and say, don't even move. I need you. I need this job. I need to stay here. Anyway, she went back into the hospital, shock treatments, and then ultimately came out, and the doctor recommended she go into her own residence. And at the time, which is tough when you're young, you haven't been married that long, you have 2 children, and he goes, you have to move on with the rest of your life. She is never going to recover. I go, oh, really? So anyway, having to deal with that and coming to the decision when you're that young to move on, which is a divorce, that was not easy.
How did you hold it together through that?
With friends, number one. Number two, I had run in high school, junior high school, and college, track and cross country. So my relief would be getting a babysitter for the girls on the weekend because I had them with me, and I would go for long runs, and sprinting at the end like you used to when you're running cross country and track, just to get your head cleared and also releasing all of the tension. So for me, running. And I loved the other thing, I loved music, classical music at the time, and I loved violins. My grandmother was a concert pianist, and I grew up with quite a bit of wonderful music growing up. And so I would listen to the violin, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E, or Bach violins, concertos for 2, or Beethoven, or Mahler. So that was my escape. I love rock and roll, still do. And I've got my playlist for cycling as rock and roll. But then between the music and being able to run was my ability, or where I went, my refuge, if you will, to try to deal with the stress at that young age and trying to figure out what the right thing to do. Not easy.
Yeah. Speaking of running and movement, you've lived an extraordinary and full life, not only running track, but also kayaking the Arctic, scuba diving Australia, trekking the Himalayas, and traveling to over 80 countries, if I recall.
No, that's right.
Yeah. And counting.
Yes, that's right. I just finished with some.
Yeah. just how has your love for adventure and the outdoors influence the way that you lead, the way that you work, and the way that you live?
You learn, well, running track, you learn an awful lot about yourself. So if you're an individual sport, swimming or running, you can tell yourself, I'm really going to put everything into this. I'm bleeding. And you'll finish the race, you go, I didn't put everything into this. So I really, from that experience, and as I had opportunities to then start, as I remarried, Kathy and I have been married 51 years. We started camping, and the camping, we tried some climbing local mountains like Mount Washington, and one thing led to another. I just love the outdoors. And climbing is like running, one step in front of the other. Got to keep your head down. You got to focus. And so one thing led to another, going into the Alps, and so Mont Blanc and Blumish Alphorn, and trekking the Altish Glacier, and coming back and doing Rainier. First time getting blown off the mountain, came back, ran that. The Grand Teton twice, Long's Peak, 2 18,000 footers in Mexico, climbing in the Alaskan range, and then over in the Himalayas up to 18,000 feet, and then back to Europe for Mont Blanc. And then with our daughter and son-in-law, we climbed the ever-popular Kilimanjaro. So it was just a continuation of what the pleasure I got out of running, number one. Number two, incredible, beautiful parts of the world. When you get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and you're on your second leg summiting, and it's an incredible world. And when you're out early in the morning, the stars are out. It's just, you're in touch with another world. And so I got so much out of the climbing, and it was connected from lessons I learned about myself and then running. And I've sea kayaked of the Arctic Circle in the Sea of Cortez off of Vancouver Island. And just when my knees started to give out, I started to cycle. So I have cycled Monterey to Santa Barbara, Crater Lake, Glacier National Park, Canadian Rockies, Aspen, a couple 100 miles up in Poland, out. So it was just a continuation because of all the tennis I played and all that running. Finally, I got to the point where just a couple of years ago, I finally had a knee replacement. But anyway, I had to quit doing that. So I went to cycling. So cycling gave me the same feel about yourself and the effort you're putting in. So I just took running and replaced that with cycling. And now I'm still cycling. I've turned it into a contact sport because I broke my hip, my femur at the neck, knocked myself out, tore my rotator cuff. So cycling's a contact sport. But anyway, that was a continuation.
Yeah. And I'm hearing some lessons there, which maybe then translated into business and leading, which one, I'm hearing just keep going, one foot in front of the other. Two, if you break something or you fall, get back up, dust yourself off and keep going. And then third of all, just this sense of gratitude for the little things and just looking up and paying attention to what's around you and the people around you.
Well, when you're working hard, really running hard as you're developing your career. So I always had the escape from being able to run and later on the cycling, but it just helped clear my soul, if you will. When you're out riding a bike, if you're by yourself and you're out there, and I used to do on Saturday mornings, I do 28, and then on Sunday, not as much traffic here, I do 45 mine. But back to your question, one of the benefits was the energy that it helped you perpetuate and maintain. So when you're running hard and dealing with some of the things that business brings your way, and you're traveling all the time, and I just always had more energy. And I always felt one of the side benefits of the exercise, whether it was then running or then climbing or certainly for cycling, was the additional energy it gave me to be able to deal with whatever came my way.
Yeah. So again, clearing your head, filling you with energy. And would you encourage the people and the teams around you to engage in similar ways to help them to perform and just show up as their best as well?
The same thing, my discussion with our children and grandchildren. We're all different. Some like to swim, some to run. I said, just because granddad runs, you don't have to do that, or to cycle, but you need to find something We're all different. That gives you an opportunity to exercise, maintain your health, and help you clear your head. We're all different. So whatever works for one doesn't work for another. So not everybody's going to want to be a crazy cyclist myself or go sea kayaking or climbing. On the other hand, there are other ways, but you need to find something that gets you out of your comfort zone that helps you get a different view of the world and helps yourself.
Peter, you're also a lifelong student of history, especially ancient civilizations like Egypt and Athens. And you've said, quote, people haven't changed much since recorded history. So when you look back across centuries and your own life, what patterns in human nature do you see repeat again and again?
Well, that is absolutely, as I've told you, we haven't changed. And of course, you have less information when you're reading about let's say, the Middle Dynasty, 2000 to 1000 BC in Egypt. You're reading hieroglyphics, and you've got their relationships with the Assyrians at the time. You got that information. You're reading about Amenhotep IV or any one of the number of pharaohs, but they were struggling within their own family, as best you can surmise, and of course how they were dealing with their themselves and their elite, if you will. Then as we go further along, you get more information because there's more that's been written. So whether it's the Greeks, it's the Romans, the little bit we've been able to pick up from the Assyrians, certainly the Babylonians, people are people. And they were, in this case, they're political because it's hard to get additional information about family life. You can only surmise as you go along. But you go into, let's say, the golden age of Greece at the time of Pericles, 435, 440, and there's a lot more information about the political struggles they were going through at the time of the Peloponnesian Wars. So you got Themistocles, who was an important figure at the time, but he then betrayed Athens, and he went to the Spartans, and he betrayed them. Then he went to the Persians, and there's quite a bit of information. Then you go on to the Romans, and you got the time of the Civil War after Caesar had crossed the Rubicon. And you have lots of information about Cicero and how he was a prolific writer, and the things that he dealt with in his life trying to survive during that time. And of course, as time goes along, we only get more information. So the bottom line is we haven't changed. People were trying to struggle and find their way within their own lives and certainly within their own political environment. And of course, as we go further along, there's just a lot more information available that just reinforces that we're no different and we haven't changed since in recorded time. Because if you think about the 6 billion years of the Earth's history, the time for man is the last, 20 seconds on that clock. So it's a very short period of time. But within that, what we do understand, we're still the same. We have the same struggles, dreams, ambitions.
What do you think are the lessons in that as people maybe have conflict or they find themselves in internal struggles? What are the patterns that you can pull out of it? Or is it just the awareness and the knowledge that everybody struggles, everybody is going through feelings of wanting to belong or be part of something and wanting to build something and grow their lives? And by knowing that, you can find common ground with people. Yes,
of course. For example, at Sonoco Products, we had 300 plants in 36 countries. Continental Can was the largest packaging company in the world. And as I traveled, I came to realize that we're all the same in this day and age, despite the color of our skin, the religion, the traditions, the heritage of that particular country. And we've been to enough of them. We're fundamentally all the same in terms of our hopes and dreams for ourselves and our families. It manifests itself in different ways. I think that was always an important remembrance, recollection, lesson, if you will, that fundamentally we're all the same. And that really has not changed, as I said, since recorded time, with, again, hopes, dreams, aspirations for ourselves and our families. Some people deal with it better than others. I don't think that's changed. There's plenty of history about how some have done that better than
one in my life deals with it just perfectly all the time, Peter.
Of course.
Look, whether it's ego, it's power, or it's trust, or how people just face pressure, so much of leadership seems timeless. How do you think history shaped the way you think about decision making and influence, especially in the boardroom?
As I was developing in my career, I had my first chance to run a business at 39, a division of Continental. You're suddenly sitting in that office, you're the general manager, the president of the division. I go, what the hell am I going to do today? So you, over time, as you think about strategy in the business, you try to develop a long-term perspective. That doesn't mean you don't have competition. You don't have to make tough decisions today or tomorrow. That's not always in front of you. But you try to keep in mind a longer-term perspective. So if you think about history and how things unfold, some happen very rapidly. They don't meet expectations. On the other hand, it just helped me reflect as we're thinking about strategy and where the business is going. And you can have all the wonderful, it's that cliche about when you go to war, you can have all the plans in the world until the first shot is fired, or Muhammad Ali. No, it was the other boxer who's, you can have all the strategy in the world till you get punched in the nose. So it's helping you remember there's competition out there. They're trying to do the same thing you are. They're trying to take away whatever your market share, your profit. So it's developing a longer term perspective about where we're trying to go. And it helped me become more strategic in my thinking, which I really enjoyed, in reflecting on our business and trying to get the team together. And how are we going to differentiate ourselves? I used to say, when you make the same product and the same equipment for the same customers, the difference between success and failure in those circumstances is the organization, the way you think, the way you act, how you differentiate yourself.
Yeah, very good advice. Let's shift to your personal leadership path a bit. You rose from sales trainee to EVP operating officer at Continental Can. Later, you took National Gypsum through bankruptcy and a cultural reinvention, and served as president and CEO of Sunoco Products, and then became dean of the McColl School of Business at Queen's University of Charlotte. And over the course of that journey, what were the crucible moments that most shaped your approach to leadership?
That's a good question. The first is when I had my first opportunity at age 39 to run a business, sitting in that office saying, what am I going to do tomorrow? Because before, my background was in sales and marketing, I knew exactly what I had to do. So reflecting on what's my responsibility. One of the things I decided at the time, this is just my bias, running this business. And the first one was we had to close a number of plants. We had two major plants, one in Southern Illinois and the other in Chicago. And I decided to go down to the plant and take questions from a question box. And I remember the head of manufacturing said, you can't do that. You're going to demean yourself. I owe it to them to give them a chance to try to understand me, because they're saying, who the hell is this new guy? We don't know anything about him, number one. And number two, it allowed me to get under the covers to get information. So I did it with the supervisors in those plants. I did it with the employees. And so that lesson I carried forward, if you will. So I then went on to the Harvard case study at Peter Browning and Continental Whitecap. Very stable, very successful business. But what the hell is Browning doing here? So I thought a way to give them a chance to find out about me was to take questions from a question box. In this case, there were multiple plants, technology, our tech center. I did the same thing there. Again, as we developed our strategy and how to respond to the circumstances. And then when I went down to National Gypsum, I remember at the time they said, look, Browning, you just got here. Why don't you take on, because we had about a 6-month period while I was getting into the business before I took over, to work on the strategic plan. I said, I'm not doing that, man. That is death by 1,000 cuts. I want the company plan. I visited 57 plants and sales offices. I visited 100 customers. I go into the plants and say, My name's Peter Browning. I'm so-and-so age. I got 4 kids. Tell me about yourself. I go around the table with the supervisors. I started doing the question box out in the plants. That allowed me to get information of what's going on because it's filtered. And one of the things I did when I went to National Gypsum, I said for those first 6 months, when I'm in the field, I don't want to be with the regional sales manager. I don't want to be with the district salesman. I want to be with the salesman. I want to see what he has to say. You learn more. Those are your feet on the ground. They're the ones that are dealing with the frustrations from corporations or the organization, and continued to do that. And of course, taking them through a bankruptcy, everyone goes, is this the end of the company? And gathering everyone together, explaining the circumstances, going to meet with customers, and then going out to the plants. I went out to all the plants and the quarries, and we'd shut things down. And I'd do all 3 shifts, and I'd get the different shifts on the supervisors, answering questions, trying to quiet things down. And we got out in 3 years. And then I joined Sunoco Products. And here you have a 100-year-old company, 300 plants, multiple, 36 countries. So for the first year, because early on, you're not as bogged down with all the responsibilities. And so I visited 28 countries and 100 plants, trying to understand the culture of this 100-year-old company coming out of a small town in South Carolina. By the time we had, 22,000 employees. They're very successful at what they do. And I gave them a chance to find out what the hell is this guy doing as a Yankee on top of that. They traditionally
don't trust those.
Yeah, that's right.
I say as I move
what
down.
I'm doing here. So,
yeah.
So then, and for me to learn about the company, what's going on, what are their concerns? When you start, I remember the first time I did it at the big, so we had 5 paper mills in one location in Hartsville. And I remember HR came in, this is the first set of questions, and they say, we cut and we cut, and you take away those positions in the paper mill. Is that how you plan to build that big house in Caroline Avenue? And I said, you can't answer that. I said, the hell I won't. So I read that question because there are no secrets. The second we were done in that meeting, I went around all the mills and the different employees, and I said, we have made some mistakes in the mill. We have to go back and take a look at those positions. But as far as my house, that's based on what I was able to sell it for in Charlotte and the bank. So next question. And I just went on and on. I continued to do that. So those were lessons I carried from my first experience in being president of a division in 1980 about finding out what's going on in the organization, helping you develop your own sense of strategy so that combined with the team, you can be more effective.
It's so interesting, right? Like you're so in touch with your workforce. And also like by doing that, by showing up and having your feet on the ground, like not only are you bubbling up ideas and building your strategy from the bottom up, but also you're communicating, you're building trust. And by doing that, I'm sure people became even more comfortable to share what was really going on and not trying to hide underperformance or things that were not broken. And was that something you just knew to do, or was there somebody you had picked up like to do this from, like that you followed, or did it just feel like the right thing to do?
The last. It felt like that's just my instinct. I don't know where it came from. I'm an outgoing personality, but I felt an obligation to communicate that. Too often you get into more senior positions and you forget from whence you've come. You forget you're only there by the grace of God for that position. When you're the CEO of a company, you're omnipotent and omniscient. You're only omniscient because they have to come to you for everything. You're omnipotent because you control everybody's salary and their careers. But the second you're gone, the king is dead, long live the king. And so I felt an obligation. The other thing you learn I have over time is everything you say, everything you do, who you talk to, don't talk to, is communicating. And the higher up again, you forget the power and the influence of the job because you control people's careers, their livelihood. So just keeping that in mind, I thought always would be better to go out. Number one, I felt I had an obligation to communicate, let them know what's going on, because guess what? They'll fill the vacuum. I know, no, darn, I'm down in a plant. When I left, they go, the man's gone. Now, what did he really say? What do you think? And the real people that are actually running in a manufacturing operation are the supervisors. And so I always met with the supervisors to make sure you don't undercut them. They felt fully informed.
Let's see.
That's my watch.
No, it's all right. This is why we can edit.
Yeah.
Perfect. The second thing that I think is so interesting is you talked about the bankruptcy at National Gypsum and guiding and navigating the company and your employees through that, but keeping a very spirited and engaged workforce throughout that journey. And part of what you did was really bring people together. And while you made tough decisions, making sure that there were moments of joy and of community. And talk to me about that and how you kept the company performing and people engaged through a really tough journey like that.
Well, the benefit before I got there to go out and visit all the plants and developing a sense. So when I'd done for that 6 months, I got the team together and I said, this is what you told me. This is what I heard, what you didn't hear. There's Keenan Flagler did a case study on the time at National Gypsum. And so that list of things learned that we shared. So it helped us develop a sense of where we wanted to go. Then the bankruptcy hit. And we were able to fall back on those plans that we had put together. But then, so how do you deal for the organization? Because it's an existential threat. It's like on death and dying. So I remember taking the organization across the street. There was a movie theater near the office here in Charlotte. And we'd have, 400 people in there. And you want to hear silence. You read the announcement, the press release, that we're declaring bankruptcy. So that's an existential threat, if you will, to the organization and to people. And we were in a position to announce we had the debtor in possession financing, we had all the capital, the money we need. It's not a problem. It happened to be because of the debt we'd had before. And the company has never been stronger. And we're in a good, well, nobody believes you for that. You've got to be kidding me. And when you're first in bankruptcy, you're worrying about making sure the court approves to pay people. It gets your attention. And so every time someone in HR or someone else would say, hey, they're worried, I say, shut things down. You manage the phones. I'm taking everybody across the street. Then I went out and went to all the plants, talked to supervisors, talked to customers. So slowly but surely, the story got a little better. We didn't lose any employees. We gained share. And we worked on new products. We were having fun. Now, we were making very difficult decisions because we'd had too much staff. We had too much overhead. And the bankruptcy was an opportunity to deal with those. But I was very open. I said, I want to be out front. I want to be explained what we're doing. This is why. So we really transformed the company during that time. Oh, I remember. So we changed our performance reviews. And because the person that had been HR at Continental came down and we worked together, knew exactly what each other and what was important. So I remember asking every plant manager to come in. I want to sit and go through those performance reviews. And you keep saying they're terrific, but they're not promotable. And I said, you're not telling them the truth. So I want to make sure we've got credibility in our performance management system. So we did that. I started 360 reviews, and they weren't automated back then. So this is 91. And so I did it myself first. I had the team do it, walked into a room, and I said, here's what you said about me. Tell me what you think. Is this fair, unfair? I'm surprised you said that, but I hear you. And then I ask each of you to do the same thing, to share it with each other, and then to go down in your organization. And we did a whole number of things. I had back in the middle of the 80s with Continental, a group of us went over to study productivity and quality in Japan. And we had 2 different trips, 2 weeks each, spent a weekend in a Shinto shrine, visiting every company you can imagine. I made arrangements for our team at National in the middle of the bankruptcy to go over to Japan and go through that same experience. That helped us. It just helped us come together. So we changed the way we measured each other. We would put TQM, total quality management, in. We started posting all those metrics and plants. When I first got there, I sent a note out, what did they say? Take a toss. No, that was speak to the boss or something like that. And we put questions for the CEO in the plant. They said, well, you're going to get a lot of information. That's okay. So I remember with my administrative assistants looking at all these on the floor from all the plants, looking at questions they'd raised. This was early days. We're in the bankruptcy. Helping to get a better understanding of what was going on within the business, how we could better address those issues as you're trying to change the culture and emerge. And we emerged in 3 years, very successful. I run into people even now, and this is 30 years later, and they said, you know what, Browning, we had a good time there. When you deal with these existential crises and you're able together be successful getting through in any and all metrics, that's a profound feeling.
What strikes me is the high level of communication, the radical transparency, and the depth of listening that you did through that time. And I think that's where, no matter what scenario your business is going through, but particularly if you need to shape transformation, shape change, are really important things to keep in mind and to embody and to model as a leader. Peter, you've described business as a place of creative destruction and said the hardest thing to learn was listening. What did it take for you to truly become a great listener, and how did that shift your leadership?
Early on, when I'm running it, I was in sales and marketing. I'm outgoing. When I was first now in charge of 2 different divisions at Continental, I had a lot of great ideas, and I made sure we organized in monthly staff meetings. We were very open and candid. But I learned over time, I learned how to shut up and listen. Number one, doing performance appraisals, providing as much information I could, and then sitting and listening. And then 3, when you start to interview people, which you do.
I'm working on the shutting up part.
Oh, okay. No, you're very good at it. But you learn to ask questions and then listen. And you don't sit down and interview and tell everybody about the company and what the job is. You start, and I do this today. And where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Tell me about your family. I do that no matter where. So, we go out every night for dinner, and there's a new waiter or waitress there. And I go, where are you from? What do you mean? How long you been here? Where'd you work before? You learn about people, and it makes them comfortable, and you get to you'd be amazed at things you learn about people and their backgrounds and their experiences. And so it took a while for me to develop that, because I didn't want to be accused of often wrong, but seldom in doubt and never unexpressed thought. I used to use those phrases for somebody else, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't me.
Yeah. Look, I can relate to that myself, right? Being young, having ideas, wanting to earn my seat at the table, which meant I wanted to share all this great thinking I was doing. I wanted to talk and tell and be right, probably.
Correct.
And,
absolutely.
But when you do that, right, you learn that if you're one person with one idea versus if you listen, you can bubble up 10 ideas. And then you can take the best of what you hear. And so that's personally, I think I've also been on that journey as I've matured and grown in my career. So I can really relate to what you shared in terms of that learning journey through, as you grow and you progress.
So I did that when I became the dean at the business school. And I go, oh, what the hell is this guy doing? He's not an academic. I got my MBA at Chicago, and they have a very robust, still do, leadership development program. And part of that was doing a number of different personal assessments, including a 360. So I'm there maybe 3 or 4 months. And again, what a surprise. I get faculty and staff together. What are we all doing in here? I want to share what's going on, where we're trying to go. We want to raise the profile of the school. We're going to do this and that. And I think it would be helpful. Can't force the faculty, but we all should do 360s. They all did. We all got in a room together, and I put my 360 up, And you sound like you know everybody in town. Maybe you don't. Can you do this or that? And I really opened up things at the school. We found that we had one individual that wasn't performing at the level they should have been, and that really opened things up. But that was another way of giving them a better feel for me and for me finding out what was going on in their heads as we brought the team together. We had fun. We had fun. I took the unabridged Shakespearean edition and sent it to all the CEOs, because you're competing with 8 or 9 other schools here for students. And I quoted Pope, little learning's a dangerous thing. Drink deep, taste not of the Pierian spring. And that's how we feel what's going on here. We had fun. And then the other one is sent the complete works of Shakespeare. So there's a tide in the affairs of men. Let me see. There's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to good fortune. On such a full sea are we now above. That's broken, not completely accurate. But anyway, on such a full sea are we now afloat. And talked about what we were doing at the school and what was different and how we set ourselves apart, because you're competing with students that want to go down to University of North Carolina, Kenan Flagler, or they want to go to Wake Forest, or they want to go to the University of, go to South Carolina. And then there's Pfeiffer, and there are all kinds of private MBA programs. So it's quite competitive. And so how do you compete and grow in that environment? So we did a number of different things to set ourselves apart.
You've sat on both sides of the boardroom table, both as a CEO and as a longtime director. How did your experience as a CEO change how you show up in the boardroom?
It takes a while to develop your understanding and your rapport with the board, because you're talking to your bosses and they're only showing up periodically. So you go into what I call carefully rehearsed spontaneity, getting ready for those meetings. So I came to appreciate trying to make sure you get the most out of the board, because they're only there, depending on your business, it could be 6 times, generally 4 times a year, and they're there for 36 hours. They're not there for 48. They're not, 24. They're not there for a long time. So learning how to get the most out of your board, because there's wisdom to be shared. In addition, ultimately, they do your assessment and they affect your pay. You're trying to manage all those in your head to the best benefit of the organization. And after every meeting, we'd all sit around. Can you believe the director said that in the comp committee or in the audit committee? And it went after every one of those meetings, you go back to, what did we say? What did we do? What did we learn? Let's make sure we get out the most out of it. So those were early lessons learned when I started serving on boards.
And was there anything about being a CEO in particular and showing up in the board meetings that really helped you to be a better board member later versus if you maybe haven't been a president or a CEO in a similar setting that maybe you wouldn't know?
There's, look, if you in board recruiting today, I can still tell you the top desire, if you take a look, it's to get someone with operating experience. What does that mean? Preferably a CEO or someone that's been a senior operating person. Why? Because they've been in there is no substitute for sitting in the corner office. I wrote a chapter for a management book. The most important decision a board makes is about the corner office. And so to understand, that's unique, that the understanding you get of what the CEO that's on whose board you're sitting and what they're dealing with. And they're unique. The pressures are unique. And it's always helpful on a board. You want a diversity of opinion and view and diversity in the fullest sense. But you want to make sure you have individuals who've been through the battle, different business, but understand the pressures you're under from your board, your employees, from the marketplace, the analyst, all those things. There's no other way to understand that. And when you're dealing with succession issues, because you've been there, you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly within your own business. So yeah, you bring a very specific skill set in terms of that experience. And so that's When you look at that list, it's number one.
And you have been there for a long time. Yes. You've been in boardrooms for over 35 years. How has the boardroom evolved over that period of time? And how is it evolving today? And what makes a board truly effective?
I'll take that two-part. So I'll talk about first how things have changed. And so the biggest changes took place in 2002. In 2001, we had WorldCom, Enron, and a lot of very bad behavior. The Enron employees were crushed. Because they were excited and they were in their 401ks and the rest, they put Enron stock in there. And that changed every board's thinking about going forward, that you needed more diversity and choices. In fact, it was better off not to incentivize so much of the savings for employees in their own company because of the things can happen and they need to be more diversified. But in any event, so two things came out of that. Number one, the New York, you had Sarbanes-Oxley. So both of these came into practice in 2002. What was Sarbanes-Oxley about? It was about the audit committee. It's still here today. It's the bane, I can assure you, of all the public accounting firms because it's dramatically changed the tenor in the audit committee. And it took us all maybe 3 or 4 years when you're in audit. What does this mean? How are we going to behave? Who wants to be the financial expert? Am I going to get sued? The other one, more impactful in terms of the boardroom, was the stock exchange listing requirement, starting with New York, followed by NASDAQ. And so what did that do? A number of things. We don't have enough time to go through all of them, but it specified...
Part two.
Yeah, part two. Yeah, now we're talking. It required all of the directors to be independent. They had to meet a bright line metric. And so what does that mean? You couldn't have your attorney on there or your investment banker because they weren't independent. They didn't meet that standard. So that was number one. Number two, you had to have 3 committees. You could have 50, but you had to have 3. You had compensation, governance and nominating, and audit. And the only people who could vote on there were the directors. And I remember a CEO going, "What the hell are you talking about? You mean I can't have a vote?" No, you can't. Will you have influence? Hell yeah, that's not going away. There were a whole series of other changes that went on in that, including the most dramatic. It required the independent directors to meet alone without the CEO. And I can assure you, no CEO would ever meet alone or allow his board to meet alone without him in there because they'll talk about him and his pay. But we were required to do it. And we sat around. It was interesting because you have Sarbanes-Oxley going on and we have these changes. And we'd say, how are we going to deal with this? Who is going to lead the discussion? Why don't you, your audit, your comp, why don't you do it? How often do we meet? That was an interesting discussion. If we don't do it every time, they'll get nervous. So this was the very early days. But out of that came the development. So someone needs to do it. The position of lead director did not exist before. There were non-executive chairs on a very limited basis. I happened to be one before that at Nucor because when Dan D'Amico came in to step in, he hadn't spent any time in the boardroom. They needed an experienced board member there. But that was the exception. But anyway, lead director it exists in virtually every board, or unless they have a non-executive chair, they don't need it. But so it's a very important position. It's the honest broker between the company, of the board, and the CEO and the board. Someone has to lead that discussion of the independent directors. The lead director does. So that was the beginning of change. 2 years later, SEC required mutual funds to vote all their shares. And they don't have time to look at every proxy. So that empowered a proxy advisor called ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services, and then Glass Lewis was the other one. And so they developed significant growing influence. So what you saw come out of boards was annual. I remember the debates we had, annual election. Why would we go to an annual election? We need the protection from a raider coming out of the chaos of the 80s. Or majority votes rather. And so major changes started to unfold in terms of board governance. But even today, ultimately, as I say in my book, the board has You couldn't run the company if you tried. I'll give you a good example. Take Lowe's or Nucor. Lowe's or Nucor, we met 4 times a year. 3 of those meetings, you come in at noon, you have lunch, you're out the next day after lunch. That's it. You couldn't run the company if you tried. So you do have to fulfill your fiduciary duty. You do have to provide the benefit of your wisdom and your group experience. I learned those were significant changes that came out of those requirements. And so today, back to the question, so the board, as I've said in my book, since you're only meeting that limited time, you have to answer 3 questions. Do you have the right CEO? Can't run it. Couldn't if you tried. Number 2, do you have a successor in mind? And if not, well, if you do, good. You ought to have if not, you ought to have a robust succession planning process, like I was just discussing. And then finally, do you have the right strategy? The board does not develop the strategy. You couldn't do it only meeting 4 times. It's up to the board then to opine, to take advantage of that collective wisdom to provide insight into whether that strategy makes sense, it's working. And of course, you got a lot of other inputs. But trying to decide you have the right CEO is no easy task. And that is a very significant decision. Of course, you're seeing more and more in the press about people stepping down and moving on. But those are the 3, when it's all said and done, those are the 3 most important responsibilities of the board. They couldn't run it if they wanted. So you need to be able to address and answer those questions. I always make sure after every meeting when I left, are we in agreement on who's the emergency CEO? You do not want to, because who knows, God forbid, the unexpected, you lose your CEO, do an accident or whatever, and you're not in agreement. You don't want to be on a phone. You don't want to all gathering, all flying into back to the company or in a boardroom trying to figure out if you're in agreement or not. You need to have agreement in the meeting before you walk out the door. It could change the next meeting, but that's an absolute.
As you think about getting to those 3 decisions and 3 responsibilities most effectively, what makes boards better at effectiveness, better at working together? And you've talked a lot about not only what happens in the boardroom, but the pre-work and things that you do in and around the board meetings themselves.
Well, we're all expected, getting paid for it, to do our homework. So what's your homework? Every board communicates in between meetings in some form or another. And of course, you need to take a look at that information. You need to, if the industry is new to you, you need to be out in the marketplace, whether it's publications, getting other information. That means reading the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, any and every. Of course, you get more and more information than you could ever possibly consume. You need to be informed about the economy, what's going on, how it affects that business. So you're in a position to make an informed opinion when you're trying to address, particularly with regard to strategic issues. Where's the business going? How does that affect us? That you need to bring to the game, and everybody does it in different ways, because you're going to have directors that may have come from marketing, or they may be the CRO, the Chief Human Resource Officer, and they haven't been in a boardroom. They haven't been faced with some of the decisions that the board's having to make, and so you have to help these new directors develop their expertise and knowledge. And I know in several recent entrances on board, as boards have diversified in terms of background and experience, whether it's men, women, people of color, it's really about their backgrounds and their experience they bring. We've had conversations, which I've led, said those of us that have been in the corner office, have led businesses, have all this board experience, every time there's a significant strategic question, we're answering it before we give anybody else. We have to give our new directors a chance to be more informed, to develop. So when over time, keep in mind, you're only meeting 4 times a year for 24 hours. It's not a lot of time. Takes time to develop your understanding of the business and of the people. So boards, so what you ask about what's changed, that is one of the more significant ones, is boards have added to the diversity of the board. And by that, they've gone, because the other thing has changed. Half of the S&P 500 CEOs don't even sit on boards, so not everybody can get a CEO. So then you're looking to very senior, very experienced people, but they may be the CIO, they're in other senior positions within the company. In any way, you need to be very mindful of the development of the board and its expertise.
That's really interesting to think about. Sorry, hold on one second. I lost my place.
Oh, that was my watch.
So as you think about a lot of those decisions, so a lot of the decisions you're talking about are the same for every board, but you've also said no two boards are the same, whether that's the culture, the personalities, the chemistry, and all those things that shape the board dynamics in the room. What does it take to build trust in a boardroom, especially because they all do look very different? And what did the best lead independent directors do to foster that environment?
That's a spot on question, particularly as you're adding new directors and change. So board chemistry is critical. And as you said, speaking to the obvious, no two boards are the same. That's a unique mix, the CEO, the unique mix of personalities and the culture of the company itself and past practices. And they're all different. It's amazing. So there's several ingredients that go into what is a high-performing board. First of all, you got to have a high-performing CEO. You can't run the business. You're only as good as the CEO. But for the board to function effectively, the CEO has to be open, transparent, and candid. That's one of the lessons learned. We didn't ask earlier about what lessons I developed and learned over and from the past, because they've got all the cards. You're playing poker. They have all the cards. You only have a few sitting on the table there. So you're relying on the information they give you, what they share with you. So you really have to work. Well, you rely on the CEO. That's number one. Number two, one of the practices that's developed over the last, since 2002, it's not required, but boards began to meet alone with the CEO. No other members of management in there. This is one of the ways to help you address the question, you think you have the right CEO? Because this is a chance for all the board members to sit with the CEO. Some speak up more than others, and that's one of the jobs, the roles of the lead director, is to go around the table, because someone may have said, we got a little problem here, but I should bring it up. No, I don't want to bring that up. You make sure that you go around the table, and particularly on very important, controversial issues, you hear from every director. That's another way back to answering your question about how do you develop a cohesive, effective board environment. Number one is making sure you find ways to make sure you get every director involved and engaged. And again, when you have new directors, you're only meeting 4 times a year. It takes time to develop your personal relationships, for directors to get to trust your judgment when you may disagree on something. I really trust them. Maybe we need to listen. So that's ultimately, and then the lead director leads the discussion when the directors are meeting alone to talk about the CEO. And you got to make sure you don't allow that to run into to get off track. It's too easy. And always make sure the CEO's nearby. If we start to get into other questions, I go, wait a minute, let's get the CEO in here. So that really should be for just feedback for their particular performance. Because if you've used that session with the directors meeting alone with the CEO, you make sure that every concern or issue comes out on the table and you're able to discuss it together. So that lends itself to, the spirit of a board working together on thorny issues.
As you've said, one of those thorny issues frequently is thinking about if you have the right leader in place in the corner office, and success, right, is one of the most important responsibilities.
Correct.
As you think about mistakes you've seen, boards get the CEO wrong at times. What are the biggest mistake boards make when either evaluating CEOs or planning for leadership transitions?
When we talk about replacing a CEO, you can go outside. You've decided to do that.
Call a certitude. No,
yes, of course. You do that first. And then the other is relying on your You don't wait till once a year for a board to discuss succession. It ought to be something on an ongoing basis. And that includes the discussions when you're alone with the CEO. How is it doing? Gee, I thought I heard from your tone in the last meeting you were concerned they weren't doing this or that. You do an annual, and then of course you have the executive session alone talking, but more importantly, discuss with the CEO. They then, you go through an annual assessment of the direct reports. That's another opportunity to assess the CEO and find out about how certain individuals are developing. And what generally happens, if you think you've got that candidate internally, you want to make sure you get further exposure to the board. They're making presentations later on when you're getting closer to a decision. You might do an outside assessment of candidates. One of the interesting things about human behavior is when it comes to public companies, there's nothing quite like the responsibility and authority of a sitting CEO. Really. Your bosses show up 4 times a year. You're on your own. As I said, you're considered omniscient and omnipotent. And as much as you may know about somebody, watching them develop, you don't know till they sit in the corner office. You do not know. And of course, from being in the search business, a resume is a 2-dimensional, not 3-dimensional. So it's making sure you understand as best you can the 3rd dimension, what that individual's like once they're in authority and responsibility. You try to, you get as much references and other takes on that individual, because you roll the bones when you put them in, and they don't always work. Recruiting for any position within a senior position within a company. So it's using those breakfasts, it's using the executive sessions, it's using the annual assessment of the people, it's the discussions on strategy as you're making a determination about, the CEO and who the successor will be and who's the right one to take that job. So it's job 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't run it. You'll never, since you can't run it, you need to make sure you got the right seat. So that's the single most responsibility a board has.
You spoke there about behavioral competencies. And
right.
One of the things I've also heard you say is the importance of quiet, discerning leadership, especially, when you are in the boardroom. What advice do you give to newer or rising directors who are still finding their voice?
That's a good question, because I've seen enough of that over time, and you're trying to help them. You spend a lot of time recruiting, and it's not unusual to say, does anybody know but that? You try to fit a job description. Does anybody know that? And anyone that might fit that job description, whatever it is, and then you try to triangulate, or if you use search, you try to get as much information about that individual as you can. So that's number 1. Number 2, most boards make sure there's someone on the board, lead director, another director, and particularly early days when we were bringing more women on the board, we'd have a woman there to help that individual get comfortable in the boardroom. You're only meeting 4 times a year. You're just getting to know each other. So spending time thinking about what else you can do to further engage the board and the new board members. So what advice would I have to them? Be prepared, and really understand the industry. I'll tell you an anecdote in a minute. And don't be afraid to speak up. You're there because of your wisdom and your experience, and you need to, don't be reluctant. Even in your first meeting, we've all been in a meeting. Well, why are they speaking up? They're new. We don't really know. You can pick and choose. It's just being thoughtful. It's a reflection of who you are. But I remember serving on all the boards I'm on. I had been consulting with ScanSource, Mike Bauer, the CEO, and I've been working with him for a year, and I was helping him recruit directors. And I remember he said, listen, Browning, he called and he said, we got a problem. I go, what the hell is that? We want you to join the board. I said, you know how old I am? I know this was like 10 years ago. You got more energy than the rest of the board. We want you to join the board. So totally new business, distribution, 2-step distribution of technology. And I thought, I've gone through all of this. I've been doing this for umpteen years. It took several years, again, to get to know. And I had done a board assessment earlier, so I knew the directors in that regard. But getting to know them as individuals, whether they would trust my judgment or recommendation, or whether I would trust theirs, and getting to understand the business. So I spent lots of time. It's only in Greenville, South Carolina. I drive down. I meet with the various SNIS heads, trying to get my head around a very different business, this 2-step distribution of technology. And so I thought, wow, every new director is going to be faced with this. I thought, hey, I've been doing this for so long. This is not difficult. I would say that I was a big time learning.
Exactly. Peter, like most humans, you've experienced both personal loss and hardship. And yet I find you to show up in the world with just so much warmth and clarity and grace. What have you learned about compassion and leadership through your own life experiences?
Well, I'll go back to what you asked earlier. Look, we're all the same. So I think it's important to communicate, to be receptive. As I said, whenever I meet people, where are you from? I want to learn about them. And then they want to ask me questions. That's one of the biggest, it's just personal on my part, but just being mindful of individuals and what they're going through. Having gone through, I think I told you, we lost our oldest daughter to alcohol. And, we dealt with that for a long time with the family and helping with her two kids are doing very well. One's 28, the other one's 24. They're doing very well. One's married. But it's just staying in touch with those around you, being open and candid, as I've said before. So you're aware of what's going on in their particular lives and how you can help and influence. Just being sensitive that life's a contact sport. They've got plenty of contact going in their lives.
Yeah, really great lessons. And Peter, as you reflect on your own legacy in business and in life, what are you most proud of?
Well, life is family. And that's one of the things you learn more than anything else. And so going through all of the challenges we've had. So we had built a beach house so we could, in fact, this was 98. So everybody gathered every Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, 4th of July. We have stayed with that. They grew out of the beach house. They weren't showing up because they got their own lives. And so we found other ways for us to gather. And so even early on, back when I was doing a lot of traveling back in the 80s and the early 90s, we always found ways. So it was, sailing down in the Caribbean. It was scuba diving, snorkeling. A lot of those adventures I did with my son. He was the youngest of the four, and I got to spend the least amount of time with him. So making a priority of family, even when you're extraordinarily busy, even when you're dealing with the bankruptcy and all the rest, not losing sight of the importance of family. So, and when you're younger, you're ambitious, you feel good about the things you achieved. But when it's done at this point in one's life is about family, first, second, and third, family and friends, as we continue to enjoy this interesting time in our life. I'm 84, my wife's 80, so we're still going on adventures. We were just in Oman. We just spent 2 weeks in the Canadian Rockies driving around. We'll be in Italy October for Kathy's birthday. It's family. From the questions you've asked before, what I learned about people and the challenges and life's a contact sport and that we're all the same, those fundamentals have stayed with me as part of who I am, how I think about life. But when I think about priorities at this point, it's family, first, second, and third.
Don't lose sight of what's important.
No, amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And look, you've led through pressure, complexity, and transformation, as we've talked about through the day here. And what helps you to stay sharp, to stay energized, and to stay grounded? And are there habits or non-negotiables in your day?
Well, I started running cross country, and then I kept running until I couldn't because of my knee. Climbed and sea kayaking and trekking. And so one of the ways I stay in touch with myself in life is I work out every day. So 5 days a week, I'm doing sit-ups, push-ups, planks, crutches. I then you saw the gym. I go into the gym and I'm either doing weights or I'm on a bike. On Saturday and Sunday, I take a break. Only in that, I get on that bike and I'll do an hour, hour and a half. I don't do the other exercise. And then Sunday, I finish off with just a half hour of hard rowing. And that keeps me energized, keeps me, in touch with myself and ready to take on whatever's coming. It's an attitude you bring into the world. I love reading. You saw the books. I love history. I just finished the Mark Twain, I read that you saw those books. I'm always waiting for the latest and best history because it's fascinating. I'm so interested. It's a mystery, even though you know the outcome, but how they got there and what people influenced. And so between that and spending time with family and exercising, I mean, that's it.
I love that attitude. And man, 84, 5 days a week, people, no excuses.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh man, I will keep that in mind as I train for the Berlin Marathon this September, when I don't want to get out and get my long run in, but do it anyway.
That's right. I'm still on 2 not-for-profits, and we do the annual Directors Exchange. So I'm involved in that. I'm a non-executive res in the business school over at Queens. So I'm still really involved in other things. And every once in a while, someone will contact an 84-year-old consultant to see if they can't help with the company on various board issues. So I'm trying to stay busy, stay out of my wife's way.
Or take some time to do this podcast thing.
Now we're talking.
No, I love that. Look, stay involved, stay interested, be available to the people you love and that love you.
Yes.
And just keep that sort of mindset of growth through your entire life journey. It doesn't have to slow down or end. As I'm hearing, like it might change shape, but you find other ways. And that keeps you inspired and energized. What about any leaders that are inspiring you right now? People you're learning from or watching closely?
No, not really. The former chairman CEO at Nucor. Nucor is unique, non-union, bending steel. When they had a record year 4 years ago, they shared $1 billion a month, $1 billion in their profit sharing amongst the employees. When we were struggling in 1980, 08 rather, at the financial crisis, the order book went down to, I don't know, like 30, 40% activity. And the senior management said, you take our pay away before you touch anybody in the organization. We never laid anybody on. So that senior management is extraordinary, and their commitment to the culture and values. There are very few levels. Things are always open. They have profit sharing. They're willing to make changes. So today, they're the largest steel company in North America and the most profitable. And there are others. Ivor Nagel, the very effective CEO at Acuity Brands. When he became CEO, there were major changes going on in the lighting business. And with his team, was able to make dramatic changes. So by the time he retired, so they were the number one commercial lighting company in North America. So when you see individuals making those kinds of changes, Bob Tillman at Lowe's is the one. Lowe's didn't have a home improvement store, if you will, a big box, until they saw Home Depot coming. They had 300 small stores in the Southeast out in the country. And so Bob Tillman, with the senior management, the board, but particularly senior management, decided to build their first retail box. And they opened it up right here in Charlotte. I went down there. We had just declared bankruptcy that day. We were their largest supplier in drywall. They were our largest customer, let me put it that way. And I remember going down at the end of the day, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, well, I got to see this store. So anyway, this Bob Tillman drove that change. Today, of course, you got Lowe's number 2 to Home Depot, but they have well over 2,000 stores that were built on that model. So I've had the pleasure and opportunity to see some really extraordinary leaders providing direction and for companies during challenging times.
And I've seen the bookcase. What about any books, sources of information, or ideas that have shaped your thinking lately?
I think I mentioned I just read 1,000 pages of Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, and what an interesting individual, extraordinary, that the risks he took as a young man to travel around as he started to develop his sense of himself and as a writer, and as he dealt with personal crises. One of the books I showed Kutuzov, who was the Russian general dealing with the politics within the Tsar and those around him, trying to protect and lead Russia at the time of Napoleon, and how they came and they burned a part of Moscow, but he's the one that would not engage them directly. Sounds interesting. To not force them to slowly turn around. Of course, they lost most of his army dealing with the winter, and he harassed and fought them on the way. He held Napoleon to a tie in the Battle of Borodino. There's so many. The Grant bio is extraordinary in giving you insight into the Civil War and what followed afterward, and how we ended up with the difficulties in the South after that period. So there's so many. You saw that one book, Henry IV. That's the second time I read that. But what he went through and leading England at the time and during the war, the 100 Years' War. And there's so many that have been really interesting, influential. So I could go on and on.
It's like picking amongst your children.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly right. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Before we close, I want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
What do you hope the next generation of leaders never forget?
That they, particularly when we're talking public companies or wherever, that you're there just for a time, borrowed time. You're fortunate enough to have that responsibility. You have an obligation to keep in mind the organization. It's not just about you. And again, everybody comes to you for everything. And it's not because who you are necessarily. It's because you control their lives and their destiny. That you keep that in mind as you think about what's on their minds, how you communicate with them as you try. So my definition of leadership is the capacity to elicit the willing collaboration of others toward a worthwhile goal. You really have to work hard at that, being in touch with the organization, letting them know about you and what's on your mind. So I want to see, and I've seen lots of changes in all these years, but effective leaders are still effective leaders. As I look at the now current chairman, CEO at Nucor, and he's doing great things, following on others who had come before him. And then the guy that really got it started, Ken Iverson, who revolutionized the steel business by going to mini mills and cycle steels. Anyway, I admire his leadership and style and those others I mentioned.
Great answer. Look, we're getting close to wrapping up here, and every episode we end with a quick lightning round.
Right.
So we're going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks and just repeat after me. Purpose is?
Well, purpose is intent. I was thinking of that book, A Purpose-Driven Life, that was a bestseller. It was very specific on the 5 things that people should do. But purpose is your intent, where you're going.
Leadership is?
Well, I mentioned that's the capacity to elicit the willing collaboration of others toward a worthwhile goal. It sounds canned because I developed that when I was teaching classes on the case study, when I'm at schools, or when I'm dealing with students. They want to know what leadership is. It is for the long term, for good purposes. You've got examples of Hitler and others that have used powerful leadership for bad outcomes. And you somehow have to be able to get the collective wisdom together over an extended period of time.
Success is?
Well, I was reflecting on that question. So there was Richard Valent was the first author of a study at Harvard that they started in 1939, looking at the cohort of the class. Kennedy happened to be in that class, and they kept studying them, doing psychoanalytic analysis and the rest. And they followed them through death, divorce, disease, success and failure, and all kinds of walks of life, as you might expect. It was that undergraduate class. But the ultimate define for him in that book was a very successful and robust relationship. 99.9% is with your wife or whomever. When you talk about personal satisfaction in life, I found that compelling.
Brilliant leaders are?
They are authentic. They are in touch with themselves and the organization. They are strategic, and they're effective communicators. Everybody does it in a different way, but they have to find a way to be able to communicate and keep in touch with their organization.
Brilliant directors are?
They're informed. They're engaged. They're willing to disagree when it's important in an open, constructive way. So I think of the play about 10 Angry Men. And so you get one director, or as one member of the, not the panel, but of the 10 Angry Men. It was about the trial, about I'm just blanking on it. It was Henry Fonda was the actor, and it was about a trial. So he's on it's not the committee. Anyway, everybody but 9 said the person was guilty. He's the one that disagreed, and over time, jury was able to convince the rest of the jury that he was right. And so that's a very powerful effect. What is really not constructive, if you have a director who disagrees on a particular issue, that doesn't happen very often because you usually come together and they go, well, I'm not going to support that. You guys are wrong. And I'm going to have a no vote. That doesn't help. What you really need to do is to be able to effectively communicate your disagreement, the difference of opinion, and get others to reflect and sit back to make sure you end up with the right decision. Or if you're going to change your mind, you've taken the time to go back and look at it. That's quite a skill. And actors who have that capability, I think, are the most effective.
I perform at my best when?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but feeling good about oneself, and that's for the reasons I talked about, that I feel I'm informed, engaged, so it depends what the circumstances are. I'm a big fan of carefully rehearsed spontaneity. So when I'm doing business things, I've spent plenty of time practicing, understanding what's going on. When it's just taking care of yourself. So you've got energy, you're ready to be involved and engaged, so that then you're prepared to take on whatever comes your way.
Peter, thank you so much. This conversation left me so inspired, and not just about how to lead and how to gain followership and how to accomplish things at work, but how to live a life with meaning, with courage, and with curiosity. And you've shown us that wisdom isn't just earned in the boardroom, it's forged in the full contact sport of life. And I want to thank you for your generosity, your stories, and your example. And would love to have you back sometime.
Thank you so much. You're very kind, and you were very well prepared, and you asked very thoughtful questions. I hope I was able to deliver and help you with what you were trying to bring out.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you to Peter Browning for joining us today. From lessons in ancient history to modern governance, from the depths of personal resilience to the height of leadership insight, this conversation is one I won't forget. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. That's it for this episode of the Brilliant People podcast. I'm Linnea Jungnelius. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment, please, and subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps us bring more brilliant guests and powerful conversations to your feed. And be sure to follow Assertitude on LinkedIn for more insights on how to lead brilliantly and live fully. Until next time, stay brilliant at work and stay human.